Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shalom. What is the main plot, the main message, the cliff note of cliff notes, or do they call them spark notes now, of the story of Macbeth? Oh, no, I thought you were going to ask me a Torah question.
Yeah, I was totally prepared for that.
You were ready for the parashah. I like to throw those curveballs. I can't do it in baseball, but I can do it in a sermon. Any ideas? Macbeth. Well, what's the actual story of Macbeth?
It's a king of Scotland.
Macbeth lives in Scotland. He's one of the main lords up there.
Yeah, and he is tempted by evil.
The witches tell him, you will be king. And the only thing he has to do is, well, they don't say this to him, but he works it out that, well, since there already is a king, I kind of need to remove him, and then I get to be king afterwards. And since the witches told me that I can be king, clearly this is my destiny. And then, of course, he does it, and everything falls apart, and he's only king for a very short while before overthrown by the people who are unhappy about his murdering of the previous king. Good. So what's the plot? What's the message? That's just the story highlights. But what is the story meant to teach us? What is it trying to tell us? What's the moral of the story? If you were there at the very end of the afternoon special when they had just finished doing Macbeth, the kids would turn to one another and say, you know, I learned something today. What would they learn?
Don't kill the king.
Don't kill the king, all right. Very, very straightforward.
But I never studied Macbeth. If the witches were telling him he could be king.
That he would be king.
Oh, that he would be king?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's different, I guess.
Is it?
Well, if he could be king, does that necessarily mean that he was meant to be king was my question. But if they're saying that he was meant to be king, well, then that's what the witches said.
I'm sorry, you're just trusting three strange old ladies in the middle of a
Well,
room?
he did. I'm not saying I would, but apparently he
And
did.
thus we get to the actual message of Macbeth, right? Which is, just because the witches say, doesn't mean it's true. Right? That hence the term tempting by evil, right? The witches knew what would happen by planting the thought of becoming king in his ear. And they knew that it would lead him to that next step, and then from that step it would lead to his destruction. That he was giving into the temptation, to the allure of kings. There was no destiny involved. There was no fate. They were playing him like a fiddle. And of course, it helps if you remember that back in that time period of England, witches were considered to be the servants of Satan and the servants of evil, then it makes perfect sense, right? That was the plot all along. The plot was, just because someone gives you the idea that you could be king, don't listen to it, because it's probably trying to tempt you to ruin. Look what happened to Macbeth. Right? So the kids at the end of that afternoon special would say, I learned something today. Just because some cackling old women tell you that you could be king, that doesn't mean that you should. Because even if you make it, chances are it's going to end badly. But it's important to find these plots. And unfortunately, sometimes we get so caught up in the minutiae of a particular tale, whether it be the famous lines from Macbeth or the famous passages from Torah, that we often lose sight of the plot, of the actual big message. Because remember, the Torah is still a book. I mean, it is the book, in my opinion, but it is not only a selection of small slices of Torah portions, it is also one giant tale, all the way actually from the first passages of Genesis till the end of the book of Chronicles, Divrei Hayamim, at the very far end of Tanakh. All of it is one plot. But we often don't talk about the plot, because we're so busy talking about, well, what happened with Joseph? What happened with Jacob? And what is the law about kashrut? And how do we deal with an open pit in the middle? It happens to be the topic in the Daf Yomi right now. An open pit in the middle of an area, whose responsibility is it to keep it from hurting? We get caught in each of those details, and they are amazing, blessed, and we are blessed for them. But we lose sight of the forest for the trees. So what is the plot of the Bible?
Hillel?
What?
Is it the saying of Hillel?
Well, so what is Hillel saying?
If it's hateful to you, do not do it to others, but then Akiva switches it.
Teach me all the Torah on one foot, If it is hateful to you, do not do it to others. It's the negative formulation of the so-called golden rule, one that I find is actually much more instructive to the average person, because most of us know actually what hurts, even if we're not always sure what we want. And if you avoid doing hurt to other people that you would be hurt by, it's a very concrete example. There's lots more we can talk about in that, but I would say that's not the plot. However, that is a great way to access the basic ideas of how we should behave. Right? The Torah definitely wants to teach us how to behave, and now we are getting close to the actual plot of the Torah. Right? What is the very first human story in the Torah? Right? Not the God parts, but when humanity, Adam and Chava come onto the stage, what is their very first story?
The apple.
The fruit. It doesn't say apple. Right? It doesn't say apple, and apples weren't even domesticated back when that would have taken place. It was fruit. And most Jewish sources in antiquity do not identify it with an apple either. That's a whole other artistic convention that we can discuss some other time. The fruit. And what is the story of the fruit? What is its plot? What is the message of that story?
You're gonna say that he was a witch?
Good for-
What? No, I'm not going to say Eve was a witch.
Well, I'm just thinking about when Macbeth.
No. Macbeth was simply because it was on my mind recently, and I wanted to give us an
Okay.
example of a very famous play that no one actually seems to know what the plot was. That it's just a bunch of stuff happens, and then there's lots of dead people at the end. Much like Hamlet, which we can talk about that plot during Kiddush. Right?
The snake was the witch.
What's that?
The snake was the equivalent of the witch.
Let's actually see. So what was the idea in that story? What was the temptation, if you will, although we view that very different than our Christian neighbors? What was the underlying plot of the story of the tree?
Knowledge of good and evil like God.
Knowledge of good and evil, which yields the capacity to choose.
Yeah.
Right? That is the differentiation mark between us and the other animals of the world. Is our choices are moral choices. We don't act moral all the time, but whether we're acting moral or not, our choices have moral consequences. They have moral weight to them. And that is something that the Torah wants to drive home page after page after page. Not just that there is fate and what happened to Joseph was fated. No, his brothers were wrong for choosing to do what they did. His father was wrong for treating him in a favoritist kind of way. He was wrong for gloating over his brothers. The prior generation was wrong. That there were mistakes and that there were also good things. That he forgave his brothers, that they had repented of what they had done, that they were reconciled, that they chose to do different things. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. That is the story of humanity throughout the Tanakh. And the story of God is that God knows that we will have the capacity to make those choices, and he would like us to know how to do it well. So, he gave us the Torah. He didn't just say, all right, fine, you've got free will, off you go. He said, fine, you've got free will, here's what you should do with it. And if you do what is right in my eyes, things will be better than if you do what's right in your own eyes. It's the idiom that's used throughout the Tanakh of doing what you want because you feel like it. May seem like a good idea at the time. In fact, that seems like a great idea all the time. But long term, if what you feel like doing at any given moment is not what you ought to be doing at any given moment, it's going to work out worse. For you, for other people around you, for society, for the world, for all of history. And thus, God gave us Torah to make the best use of our free will so that we would be able to do what was truly right for ourselves and for everything else. That is the story of the entire Torah. That is the story of the entire Tanakh. Every single episode is teaching that same lesson. Now, it may not always seem that way. Sometimes it feels like we're just dealing with family drama, especially throughout the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, where it's family drama left, right, and center since like chapter 11. But the reason the Torah is bringing these particular episodes out of all of the different parts that happened to our ancestors' lives is to teach this lesson. And the same thing happens when we get into the more legislative portions of Torah. It's teaching us those laws not because they are the law, but because the Torah knows that we have choices, that we can choose to do what's right or not what's right, but we need to know what's right before those choices can truly be informed. And so the Torah gives us an outline of how we deal with all the different circumstances of life, whether it be ritual, civil, criminal, so that we know right from wrong, so that when we make choices, we will make them to the best of our capabilities with that best information. And then post-Torah, well, now we get the reports. Now that we've got the Torah, now that we're a nation, how well are we doing with this? Well, let's look at the book of Joshua. Let's look at all the judges. Let's look at all the kings. They all were terrible except for like 2.5. We get example after example after example throughout the entire rest of the Bible of how well do people manage to do what is right and avoid what is wrong. That's the plot. Indeed, you might say that's the plot of life. That we are here in order to enrich our souls by choosing to walk a path that is right. And by walking that path, our soul will be ennobled, our lives will be made better, the lives of everyone around us will be made better. Do you speak English? And we will actually come to know a sense of peace, a sense of awe and reverence, a sense of balance, a sense of completeness, a sense of shalom. The Torah is telling us that we're not alone, that we're not drifting through life, that there is a path that we can walk, and we are capable of walking it. Judaism is fundamentally an optimistic religion. It believes that God gave us a task that was for our benefit, and that we have the capacity to fulfill that task. Sometimes with mistakes, but even when we make mistakes, we have the capacity to then fix them, to then return to a better place on that path, hopefully a little bit wiser than we were when we were walking off of it. Judaism believes in the capacity of humans. We are not damned. We are not fallen. We are simply travelers. We are journeying. And the Torah is our guidebook. We use it. After all, that's its reason. That's its plot. Shabbat Shalom.